another edition of the Magic Latest Podcast where we discuss everything Orlando Magic basketball. I'm your host, Jalon Dixon, and today we've got a lot of stuff to get into as we are officially on Orlando Magic Media Day. By the time that you see this episode, we will be looking forward to the guys having their first real discussions with NBA media outside of podcasts for the first time as we lead into the start of NBA preseason. With all that being said, remember to like, comment, and subscribe for daily Orlando Magic content. We are on the road to 1,000 subscribers and trying to become one of the biggest Orlando Magic pages here on the YouTube platform. So remember to hit that post notification bell so you always know when we're dropping new videos. And let's get right into it. And we're actually going to start with a former Orlando Magic player first, Cole Anthony, who of course everyone knows in the Desmond Bane trade was sent to the Memphis Grizzlies. Later on was allowed to be waived, chose his own team, and elected as a free agent to go to the Milwaukee Bucks. And he recently revealed why he chose the Bucks to go to. He says, "I just looked at what they've accomplished here. Obviously, they won a championship a few years ago. I looked at the structure of the team and the coaching staff and just was like, all right, this aligns with my goals. I felt like I could slide in here and help this team win some games." Later on, he goes to say, "I'm super excited to be on Milwaukee, man. It just feels like a breath of fresh air after being in Orlando for the past 5 years. Obviously, I love my time there, but this feels like, for me, a stepping stone in my career." He later goes on to finish that out by saying, "I just want to come in and help the team win in whichever way I can. I think they're going to ask me to do what I can do, which is score, pass the ball, guard, whatever. But I'm really just happy to be a part of this team, specifically because it's been great being here these past couple of weeks and being with these guys. The energy is high. There's a real professional vibe around everybody, and everybody has a chip on their shoulder." Now, real quickly, just to get into this one, because this is not an Orlando Magic player currently anymore, so I don't want to dwell on this too long. Shout out to Cole Anthony for having a really good situation for himself, going to a Milwaukee Bucks team that is going to find him real legitimate playing time. If you look at if you really listen to what he said and pay attention to the overall environment, you look at what he's brought to the table during his time in the NBA, and you look at what the Milwaukee Bucks need, and Cole Anthony addresses that directly, right? They need a scoring punch off the bench, or in some cases, if you look at that Milwaukee Bucks team where their starting point guard looks like it may be Kevin Porter Jr., there's a lot of situations where you can make the argument that Cole Anthony could play his way into the starting point guard job. His overall goal is to be able to upraise his career. We saw somebody like Gary Trent Jr. have a revival with the Portland Trailblazers and then build on that even further in a season or two with the Milwaukee Bucks. This could be a space for Cole Anthony to do something very similar. I think that if you also look at what he said, more particularly than anything, this is a team that outside of Giannis does not have a ton of perimeter scoring of any kind, and he is somebody that should be able to slot into that really well. Obviously, we don't want to necessarily see the Milwaukee Bucks do well, but as a guy who did spend 5 years in Orlando, we want to see Cole Anthony succeed, and I think that ironically, despite the fact that this is a team that I don't think is better than Orlando, I think it might end up being a better fit for him long term. Because let's be honest, if you look at the guard rotation of the Orlando Magic right now, let's say Cole Anthony didn't get thrown in that trade. The minutes for him would be so difficult to come across when you look at the guys that are already occupying the space. Desmond Bane, Jalen Suggs, Tyus Jones, he probably would be in that conversation biting minutes between Anthony Black, who I think is going to be very deserving of those minutes, especially because of what he brings defensively, Jace Richardson, who is a big-time three-point shooter and provides real floor spacing, something at a more consistent rate than any of the years that Cole Anthony ever shot the ball from beyond the arc with the Orlando Magic. Of course, you're using college three-point line versus NBA three-point line, but again, if we're just going strictly off percentages. And then Jet Howard, who wasn't even able to really get on the floor truly last season and is still really struggled to put himself in real position to get minutes and might not even be able to find real minutes in this version of this team, let alone if Cole Anthony were also on the squad to have to fight for minutes as well. So overall, probably a win-win situation across the board when it comes to the Orlando Magic. Magic get Desmond Bane long-term as a player who can be a tertiary three-point option and put tertiary ball handler, right? Or a lead three-point option and a tertiary ball handler for their team. And Cole Anthony gets the opportunity to pick a place where he wants to go that he can actually be successful and maybe even compete for that starting point guard job, like I said before, because the talks in camp are going to be really interesting between whether or not the Milwaukee Bucks believe that Cole Anthony should be the starting point guard over Kevin Porter Jr. or Kevin Porter Jr., who's been with the organization a little bit longer, not by much, but still a little bit longer, may be the guy that takes the opening night tip-off with the starting five initially. So just wanted to give my flowers to Cole Anthony, given the fact that he's not on this team anymore, but has recently, discussed, what his new opportunity looks like. And we want to see him thrive in it, even if he isn't wearing a Orlando Magic jersey anymore. Next up, let's talk about Bleacher Report, who put together a list of their top 5 young cores in the NBA, with the Orlando Magic plopped right at 5th. Who is over that, you may ask? Some of them seem obvious. The other ones, a little bit more questionable. Oklahoma City Thunder, makes sense. Houston Rockets, understandable. San Antonio Spurs, feels like it's very much carried by Victor Wembanyama. Stephon Castle adds to that a little bit more as well. And I think if you want to throw De'Aaron Fox in there as a quote-unquote young talent, understandable. I can consider the fact that he's still a guy that I don't think he's eligible for, top 25 under 25 or anything anymore. But I do think that he's still, a considerably young player that should be at least considered in this kind of conversation. The Detroit Pistons, which definitely feels heavily carried by Cade Cunningham because Jalen Duren and Jaden Ivey are both relatively unproven. Ron Holland was solid in his rookie year last year, and that's also putting a lot of pressure on Ausar Thompson, who really hasn't even shown his full potential with this team yet, given the fact that he spent the first season in the NBA with the blood clot issue that held him back for a little while. And then when he did get on the floor, he did look like an all-NBA caliber defender, but a guy that we still have a very small sample size of all in all. So the Orlando Magic coming 5th, and more particularly behind the Detroit Pistons and San Antonio Spurs. I think if you look at the overall body of work when it comes to the youth on those 3 teams, the Orlando Magic far and away are better than those teams. Again, is Victor Wembanyama probably considered the best player of that group? Yes, I think that most would probably consider Victor Wembanyama as that next best player. And then you have that toss-up between whether or not you take Cade Cunningham or Paolo Banchero. Me personally, lean more towards Paolo Banchero at the moment, but I can also understand why the ball handling aspect and just playing a quote-unquote more important position at point guard for Cade Cunningham at 6'8", and the ability to guard multiple positions, so on and so forth. I could see why people would at least give him consideration as being better than Paolo Banchero. But let's say that Paolo Banchero and Cade Cunningham are at an even space, and let's say Wemby is about a tier above, right? After that, Franz Wagner is better than any other secondary player we're going to name. Franz Wagner is better than Jaden Ivey, better than, I would say, arguably on par, if not slightly better than De'Aaron Fox. I would say he's definitely better than Stephon Castle. And let's say if we go a step further than that, then we're talking about Desmond Bane. We're talking about Wendell Carter Jr. We're talking about Jalen Suggs. Like, when you start going through deeper and deeper throughout that starting rotation, and don't even get started on the bench where we can get to Anthony Black and Tristan Da Silva, like, if you want to base young cores based off of who has the best young player, sure, but then I would make the argument that I don't even know if Houston deserves to be this high on the list, because I think that outside of Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Victor Wembanyama, Paolo Banchero is arguably the 3rd best player of the group. Not, in this case, I would say either Amen Thompson or Alperen Sengun. They would probably be closer to 4th or 5th, maybe 5th and 6th, depending on who you talk to. So it has to be based off the entire body of work. And again, let's say Wemby's a tier above everyone else. Okay, fair. Let's say that Cade Cunningham, let's say for the sake of argument that Cade Cunningham is considered slightly above Paolo Banchero, because he was considered slightly above him in the ESPN Top 100. Not that that's gospel, but let's just take it into consideration. Let's say those two guys are either, in Wemby's case, a tier ahead, and in Cade's case, a smidget above Paolo Banchero. Cool. But when you talk about cores, that means a group. Again, Franz Wagner, Jalen Suggs, and I would say Desmond Bane as well, all, if we were ranking younger players within this group of San Antonio, Detroit, and Orlando, I think Orlando would easily have 4 of the top 10 players within that group, right? Wemby, Cade, Paolo, and then honestly, Franz, Maybe if we're counting De'Aaron would be next. And then Desmond Bain, Jalen Suggs, and then I guess at that point that's where you get to like the Stephon Castle, Jaden Ivey, Jalen Duren. But again, even in that top six, even in the top six, the Orlando Magic have, or excuse me, the top seven, the Orlando Magic have 4 of the top 7 players within that group. So if we're talking young cores, Bleacher Report tripping on this one. Not exactly sure what the criteria on this one was, but doesn't really make sense if we're being honest if you're counting in the totality of a group and not just one singular talent. You guys let me know in the comment section down below. Am I overrating the Orlando Magic talent in comparison to the other teams on this list? Again, it was Oklahoma City at the top, the Houston Rockets second, San Antonio third, Detroit Pistons fourth, and then the Orlando Magic fifth. I think that the Orlando Magic are way too low, and I think that if you're just looking at the top ranked players within each team, maybe they have an argument. But if we're talking about as a group, the Orlando Magic have an argument to be right there up with the Houston Rockets for top 2, if I'm being honest. But you guys let me know in the comment section down below how you guys feel. Next up, let's talk about what Paolo Banchero said about what he's been hearing in terms of the rumblings around this team and the high expectations that have been raised given their offseason and the state of the Eastern Conference. He says he talked to The Athletic and told them, honestly, that's like music to my ears. Let's just say I'm very relieved to have some real expectations for our team and for myself. I think just as a competitor, as a winner, as a player, you want to be expected to be great. Later on, he says, when he's talking about his reaction to the Desmond Bain trade, he says, I just didn't believe it. I had a feeling we were going to make a trade, but I felt like there were some guys that were kind of up on the list of who we would maybe trade for, at least in my head, and Desmond Bain was not one of them. So when I heard that one, I was like, Desmond Bain, I was like, wow, he's a hell of a player. I was excited. Obviously, he was in the West, so we didn't play him too much. But every time we played Memphis, man, he'd give it to us. He'd give it to us. And I just liked his whole demeanor and how he played shooting the 3. So, a couple things to unpack there. First off, I think that it's good that our star player views these expectations as nothing more than fuel, not something to fan the flame, not something that blows his head up and makes the Orlando Magic believe that there's something bigger than they actually are. Just something that makes them understand that there's something to live up to, right? It's not necessarily gassing up the fact that they're viewed as the 3rd best team in the Eastern Conference or considered as the likely 3rd best team in the Eastern Conference. It's the expectations that come with being considered a top 3 team in the Eastern Conference that Paolo Banchero is embracing. And I think that's so important because there's a difference. There's a difference between drinking your own Kool-Aid and being hype about the fact that people are gassing your team up and looking at the challenges that are presented by the fact that now your team has the target on their back when you've been the hunter for the last 2 to 3 seasons. So when you talk about what Paolo Banchero is looking forward to this season, you have to be excited to know that that's going to be the linchpin, right? Your best player is illustrating out in the open early and often that he views this season as a season not to be taken for granted. And that's very important. And let's talk about what he said about Desmond Bain. I think it's going to be really important for the embracing of camaraderie, particularly when it comes to ingratiating Desmond Bain. There's a lot of conversation around the idea of whether or not Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner can coexist, right? And this is a conversation that happened a ton with the Boston Celtics when it came to Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. And eventually, they got over the hump, right? They acquired Drew Holiday. They bring in Kristaps Porzingis, who, of course, in all, did not necessarily add too much to their overall championship run, but was a key piece to their regular season. But more so, adding Drew Holiday in exchange for Marcus Smart, that was a real move for them that not only solidified that their 2 main stars could coexist, but that they were only really one more piece away from really putting the nail in the coffin in terms of solidifying themselves as the championship caliber team that they eventually became. Not to say that the Orlando Magic are going to jump all the way from a team that just went 41-41 and was injury riddled last season, or the season prior was knocked out in 7 games in the first round, to all of a sudden being in the NBA Finals. But what I will say is, in a sense, this Desmond Bain move is, in a way, the Orlando Magic's version of that Drew Holiday trade for the Boston Celtics. Because now, when you look at the continuity that this Orlando Magic team has built over the last 3 to 4 seasons, look at everybody who's still here. Wendell Carter Jr. has been here. Paulo, Franz, Jalen Suggs, Anthony Black has been here the last few seasons. Jonathan Isaac obviously is a staple within the Orlando Magic franchise at this point, with how long he's been with the organization. Goga Batazde has been around for the last year to 2 years as well, and been a guy that has, really kind of shaped a rollout for himself. Mo Wagner, of course, has been here for a handful of seasons. This team, from a continuity standpoint, has established themselves in a real way where right now, all they've ever needed is to improve their three-point shooting and continue to build up their perimeter talent. You bring in Tyus Jones, you bring in Desmond Bane, and they act as your Drew Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis in just a different way. Drew Holiday brought to the table another perimeter ball handler next to Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, and Derek White, as well as real elite level defense on the perimeter. Kristaps Porzingis presented a element that they never had before outside of, remnants of Al Horford, which was a stretch 3 element and the ability to have a high level shot blocker around the rim, given the fact that Kristaps Porzingis is like 7'2". For the Orlando Magic, it's a steady ball handler that can take up minutes for Jalen Suggs and also make up for the fact that Jalen Suggs has a significant injury history. Or you have somebody like Desmond Bane and to a certain extent Tyus Jones as well, who both address the three-point shooting issues that the Orlando Magic were dealing with. So I'm glad that he looks at these expectations the way they do, because this is a team that made a move that, if we look at, history's sake, or historical context around these kind of moves, this, for a team like this, will be considered the needle mover that takes them from being this fringe playoff team that makes a little bit of noise throughout the regular season, puts a tough act up in the first round of the NBA playoffs, but doesn't necessarily do much else. This is the kind of move that's supposed to help propel them above that, and that with that comes some pretty high expectations for not just your team, but for the best player on the team that's going to be, in real conversations to be a potential All-NBA kind of guy this upcoming season. And, of course, a lot of discussion around Franz Wagner being a first-time All-Star as well. So just kind of excited about hearing what Paulo Banchero said. And, again, when he talked about how Desmond Bane fits into all of that, ingratiating him into this offense is going to be so important, because just like the Boston Celtics welcomed Drew Holiday with open arms, just like the Milwaukee Bucks once upon a time welcomed Drew Holiday in with open arms. Once upon a time, in the very beginning of everything, the Golden State Warriors opened their arms up to Kevin Durant when he chose to go there. And that ingratiation period in the beginning that helped create this camaraderie early for a team that was really well established and very well understood what their identities were outside of that player coming into their organization, by ingratiating and embracing them in a high way, in a really good way, it helped that process even more. And I think a lot of those guys from those championship teams will tell you, like, that aspect of, being together, playing together, building, a real relationship with this newer person within an organization that has so much continuity already, was probably one of the differences that was made that helped put them over the top. It's not just the guy themselves, but the way they went about treating that guy when he came in. So Desmond Bane, obviously an integral part of what they're trying to build, and I think it's going to be really important that he gets a lot of touches early. I think it's going to be really important that we see what he can do as a three-point shooter in this offense early, and overall just kind of excited to see what this team can do with, real expectations, as Paulo said, because this is a team that's always kind of been under the radar, and the team that's been punching up, the team that's been the hunter, as I mentioned earlier. But now they're coming from a completely different perspective, where now they're the hunted, and that's something that's going to be important, because some doubt them, some believe in them, but at the end of the day, the Orlando Magic understand that the biggest thing for this season is that it can't be a wasted opportunity. So it's going to be interesting to see what that looks like. Last but not least, there were a couple of comments about Wendell Carter Jr., and particularly the biggest one was that he is viewed as the Orlando Magic's true X factor from within the organization. Of course, we've talked about X factors in a bunch of different ways this offseason from different publications. Some say Anthony Black, some say Tristan da Silva, some say Jalen Suggs. Well, the guys in the locker room say that it is Wendell Carter Jr., and I think that's a really interesting situation because I think a lot of people would say that Wendell Carter Jr. is also the biggest question mark across the board for this team. So I guess you could say those are one and the same thing because X factor means if the question gets answered, this team is going to be a lot better than most people expect. And if the question doesn't get answered, then we have even more issues about this team than we came into the season looking at. But more particularly, what was said about Wendell Carter Jr. and my personal, from the actual, mouths of guys in the room. Let's start with Desmond Bane. He said, he's a monster too. Wendell is going to be the X factor for us. You'll see. If you look at the modern day fives in the NBA, Dell can switch 1 through 5. He's making great decisions in the pocket on his rolls. He's finishing strong around the rim. He's shooting threes. It'll just be about staying healthy and staying confident. I think he's a guy that can really open everything up for us. And then head coach Jamal Mosley actually doubles down on this. And he says Dell, to Desmond's point, is one of the most important pieces to our group. He is our anchor. He's a connector on the floor, and he's a connector off the floor. His toughness, his physicality, his presence, as soon as he steps on the floor, changes the way in which we play. And he's so important for us in so many aspects. And that's why I believe Desmond would make that statement, because it's true. Dell is a big piece of what we do and how we do it. And he owns that, and he's stepping into that role with extreme and supreme confidence. Another player that was also mentioned was Anthony Black. Well, we're going to stick with we're going to start with Wendell Carter Jr. We may speak on the Anthony Black comments a little bit later on. Let's talk about Wendell Carter. This is a guy who, when healthy, can average a double-double. This is a guy who, when healthy, is capable of being a 36% three-point shooter on at least 4 attempts per game. When healthy, this is a guy who you can ask to be an anchor on your defense as a big-time rim deterrent behind Paulo Banchero, Franz Wagner, Jalen Suggs, and Desmond Bane. Wendell Carter Jr. is a guy that if you don't have to move off of him, provides a lot of real opportunity at that center position because of the fact that he does, as Desmond Bane mentioned, have the versatility to move between the 1 through 5 in terms of guarding on the perimeter and also being able to bang down low under the low block. I mentioned during the offseason a few different situations where maybe the Orlando Magic will consider a reunion with Nikola Vucevic from the Chicago Bulls. Again, the Orlando Magic and Chicago Bulls have made a million trades as going back to the Franz Wagner and Paulo Banchero acquisition, but less Paulo Banchero and more of the Franz Wagner situation, right? In terms of a lot of the draft picks and trade situations, obviously Kobe White was in conversation to potentially be traded to the Orlando Magic as well at one point this offseason. So Nikola Vucevic, in his last year of his contract before he becomes an unrestricted free agent, you trade him to try to get something back. The Orlando Magic have a history with the Chicago Bulls. Go after him. But the one person who makes that something that maybe is not as necessary to consider is Wendell Carter Jr. You only have to consider going after a guy like Nikola Vucevic, given the fact that you would be essentially trading some kind of young talent, because the Orlando Magic don't have a ton of draft picks left to be able to trade. I think their last draft pick they're even eligible to trade is in 2032. So they would have to give up real young talent that they actually like, as well as maybe a salary that actually matters, like a Jonathan Isaac. And you don't want to do that for a 1-year rental in Nikola Vucevic, or a potential 1-year rental in Nikola Vucevic, if the likelihood is that you lose him in the summer, you give up decent asset, and on top of it, you kind of send a mixed message to Wendell Carter Jr., who in quotes like this, is said to be a linchpin for your organization, but then you trade for a guy like that. Or even worse, you send Wendell Carter Jr. back to the Chicago Bulls in exchange for a guy like Nikola Vucevic, and it feels almost like you gave up on him entirely. Wendell Carter Jr. has a big part to play in that in terms of his health and in terms of his production on the floor. But similarly to what I was saying about the camaraderie around Desmond Bane, these guys have to embrace Wendell Carter Jr. Franz Wagner has progressed every single season. Paulo Banchero was a first-time All-Star last year. Jalen Suggs, when healthy, is an All-NBA caliber defender. Desmond Bane is one of the best third options in the NBA going into next season. The only guy who has to come into that starting five and figure out where he fits in the mix of all of that is Wendell Carter. And I think it's very obvious. Roll to the rim hard and finish around the basket. Take 4 threes a game and hit them at a 35 to 36% clip. You don't have to be a knockdown three-point shooter. You don't have to be Brook Lopez, Splash Mountain, shooting 40% on 6-7 attempts per game. No. Just shoot 4 or 5, keep the defense honest, and hit league average, just to make sure that defenses have to respect you from beyond the arc. And then as a defender, be somebody that if you put you next to a Paulo Banchero, put you next to a Jonathan Isaac, put you next to a Goga Batadze, even next to Mo Wagner, you can be a high-level rim defender and be a guy who can also guard in space in really clutch moments. That's the most important thing. Wendell Carter Jr.'s job is probably the easiest of anybody in the starting 5 as far as what he's asked to do on a night-to-night basis. He just has to be able to produce. He just has to be healthy, and he just has to be able to produce. But with that being said, guys, this has been another edition of the Orlando Magic Podcast. This has been another edition of the Magic Latest Podcast, the Orlando Magic Latest Podcast, where we are discussing everything Orlando Magic basketball. Man, I'm so excited, so excited that with Media Day kicking off, we are officially at the start of the NBA season. Yes, I know, no real basketball just yet. Preseason is touch and go. But, man, it's good to see the guys back on the floor, good to see guys back at training camp, and good to know that NBA season is right around the corner. With that all being said, I'll see you guys in the next episode. But until then, peace.